You know those dreams where they're so vivid and well thought out, there's a plot twist around every corner, but instead of frustrating you like a bad mystery movie, it actually gets you more engaged in what's happening because every single plot beat, character moment, and fight scene feeds back into each other and makes you desperately want to see the end of that dream, but at the same time, never want it to end because you don't want to wake up and lose this feeling of just pure joy when you face reality again.
Why did you wake me up? I told you never to wake me up!
Well, that's what playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was like for me, with one key exception. Now, in all honesty, I could make some grand statement about how this game reawakened my passion for video games, and is one of the few remaining holdouts of good quality games being made in a dying industry that only spews out sludge nowadays. But not only would that not be true about the industry, it wouldn't be true to me, because the truth is, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was like a dream that, despite a very ominous ending note of its story, it left me happy and satisfied to wake up from. I've spent about 208 hours in Rebirth. The game had me wrapped so tightly around its Buster Sword that I went through every pain and trauma-inducing piece of content in this game to platinum it.
My brother! When do I attack?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Okay!
Something I didn't even do for Remake, despite how much I loved that game and all it did to flesh out Midgar and set the stage for this remake series of games. Rebirth had somehow managed to completely suck me into everything it had to offer, including gameplay offerings that I usually steer as far away from as I possibly can.
Queen's blood?
Oh, this is the card game. Okay. This is... I'll learn to play later.
Later.
Don't do this to me!
Square Enix has made what is quite possibly the game of the year here, and I can't wait any longer to get into it. A couple things to make clear before I get into this. A. There is going to be as little comparisons to the original Final Fantasy VII as possible. And 2, I'm not going to get into the weeds of theories for the next game here. That is a black hole and a half that I will let other YouTubers traverse. Yes, this is a remake of the original game, so comparisons to it are perfectly valid to make, and in some cases where I feel it relevant, mainly within the narrative design and combat design, I will be making those comparisons. However, largely I will be avoiding them because the remake series is fundamentally a different genre of game than the original was. The original Final Fantasy VII is, at its core, a turn-based action role-playing game with elements of three-dimensional open-world exploration and an isometric/fixed camera perspective for more linear sections. This genre and the tech at the time dictated how the game was constructed, how the player interacted with the world when exploring, and how the turn-based gameplay and story of the game was presented to the player. The Final Fantasy VII Remake series is, at its core, also an action role-playing game, only this time the game takes up a fully realized three-dimensional space and places you in the center of all that with the characters, rather than being placed in a fixed camera or isometric perspective. This change in presentation affected everything about the game from top to bottom. The gameplay, narrative design, and visuals all had to be adjusted and reworked because of this, so constantly comparing the remake series that has a fundamentally new identity to the original just wouldn't be relevant or useful to explaining what this game does to suck you in. Rebirth isn't even directly comparable to its predecessor of Remake, given the confined non-linearity of Remake's setting inside the steel pizza metropolis of Midgar and the 3 sectors you are allowed to explore. Rebirth at its core is a 3D open-world action role-playing game where everything in the game, even the random NPC dialogues or the most innocuous minigames, loop back into itself to make for one of the most tightly constructed, seamless experiences I've ever played. And of course, as always with every single video I make on any video game, there will be spoilers ahead, but please click off the video and go play and experience the game for yourself and then come back to watch the video. Listening to my ramblings is great and I love you all for it, but no video on YouTube can accurately capture what a video game is like better than actually playing the game. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into the dream that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The dream begins here, the first pillar of the entire Final Fantasy VII experience, the combat. If you've played Remake, you'll know exactly what to expect. Square Enix took the core elements of the original Final Fantasy VII combat system, such as limit breaks, materia, and mixed them with the aspects of their more recent real-time action titles to create a combat system for Remake that was damn near perfect. This system is really addicting as it gives us button mashers with zero patience the ability to successfully bash our heads against the brick wall, while also offering the big brainers a chance to think out their strategy for the fight ahead via the slow motion tactical mode. The tactical mode is really what makes the combat go from being a game of hungry hippos to 3D chess. And it also can be a huge lifesaver for some of the more intense final encounters, as it gives you a nice breather from how chaotic some battles can get. However, for as great as it was, the system in Remake did have its drawbacks. ATB could be really slow to generate for party members that you weren't controlling, and while this feature definitely emphasized hot swapping between your party members to get used to each of their playstyles and strengths and weaknesses, it could also be very frustrating as some abilities couldn't be used when you staggered an enemy. Getting the level 2 limit breaks could also be a little confusing, and aerial combat in Remake was an absolute joke, and it made fighting any enemy as Cloud and Tifa that hovered more than a foot off the ground a worse pain than stepping on a Lego barefoot. Thankfully, they have fixed these particular problems in Rebirth. Aerial combat for Cloud was fixed by the addition of an aerial dash attack. When dodging as Cloud, simply hold the attack button and you'll fly across the screen like blonde Superman, and you can stay up there basically as long as you want, as pretty much every ability Cloud has access to can be done in the air. However, that's just the solution to one problem with Cloud only. Rebirth implemented a really genius solution to the rest of it via the synergy system. The synergy system is one half of the real jam that makes the jelly of Rebirth, and it consists of two parts: synergy skills and synergy abilities. Synergy skills are separated into two types, offensive and defensive, and every character has at least one offensive and defensive skill. These abilities will range from a stronger block or dodge that deals increased stagger on a perfect timing on the defensive side, to a tag team assault from close or long range, or a charged close or long range heavy attack that deals either massive elemental or massive magic damage. A few of my favorite synergy skills are the bullet batter with Barret and Cloud, where I think Barret tries to kill Cloud, but Cloud actually uses that to his advantage and redirects the bullets towards the enemies. Barret's iron defense ability, as it is seriously broken as a defensive option, making you basically immune if you spam the crap out of it. And then my absolute favorite is performing a fastball special with Tifa and literally throwing her into the air at an enemy, where she can also stay forever until the enemy is a paste in the ground. Tifa really was my answer to a lot of problems in this game. The part that really makes these synergy skills extremely useful is that using them generates a lot of ATB for both you and your party members you aren't currently controlling, allowing you to get their special moves off even faster, which then feeds into the other half of the synergy system in the synergy abilities. When performing ATB abilities, this fills a secondary meter on the character who performed them up to a total of 5. Getting this meter up to 3 on any two party members unlocks access to a unique ability specific to whichever characters were involved in it. These abilities would offer one of 4 different status effects and bonuses to the characters involved, including upping the level of your limit break, granting access to unlimited magic points for a short duration, extending the duration of stagger time on an enemy, or adding a third ATB bar. All of these abilities are also uniquely animated and speak to the personality and skill sets of the characters involved, and really are a blast. You can really tell that the animation team had just as much fun making them as I did watching them. My absolute favorite is the Sweet and Sour Salvo, the one where Aerith uses red as a wrecking ball, and honestly any of the synergy skills with Cait Sith, because he's just completely chaotic, and they feed into the combat loop incredibly well. If you play your cards right and utilize the synergy skills properly with the right materia setups, you can crank out some seriously damaging combos and gain access to your level 3 limit breaks incredibly fast. Which synergy skills and abilities you have access to during your combat depends on who is in your party at any given time, and which skills you have unlocked through the newest addition to the progression system, Folios. On the surface, Folios look like just your bog standard level progression system that replaces the old weapon core system from Remake. Every level up, you receive some skill points that you can allocate to any bonuses and skills that are available to you, and the higher up you go in the tree, the more useful the skills, but also the more expensive. Given the max level for all your characters is 70, you won't have enough skill points to unlock everything on the first playthrough. You can also gain extra skill points through the various manuscripts you can obtain from completing chapters, side quests, minigames, combat challenges, and by buying some of them from the different vendors scattered across the world. In order to fully upgrade all the folios, two things need to be done. The first is that the party rank must be fully upgraded, and this can only be done via completing the world intel assigned to you by one character that the fanbase has decided they are the bane of their existence. I'll speak more on this later when I talk about the game world, so let's move on to the second requirement for upgrading the folios. The second requirement is a playthrough of hard mode, mainly focusing on the completion of chapters and side quests. However, players who don't want to replay the entire game and all the side quests on a harder difficulty, something I wouldn't blame anyone for doing, those players can freely respec any and all skills they wish to. Respecing is really useful as it allows you to freely mess around with the synergy skills and other passive bonuses to really find your playstyle. Getting access to all the synergy skills and abilities is very nice, but the passive bonuses and extra skills and limit breaks are also very useful. The folio system is a really great way for the player to mix and match and test the waters with whatever team combination they want to. It really allows them freedom to play whatever way they want and deepen the bonds with whatever party members they want. Which brings me to the playable characters themselves, and before I get into this, I want you guys to drop who your favorite character to play as was and what your favorite team composition was. I'll reveal mine at the end of the section. In a game this long with this much content, Square Enix did an incredible job of making not only the 7 main playable party members within the game be completely unique and fully fleshed out characters with their own identities, strengths, and weaknesses, but they also managed to make every single character be useful. There's not a single weak link in the bunch, and on top of that, they also aren't confined to the roles they were designed to fill. While they definitely excel in those roles, should you require their skills for a certain challenge, any party combination can be made viable through your own engagement with the system set before you. Our main playable cast consists of 4 returning characters from Remake with Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barret, and now joining the fray across our journey to the planet is our best boy, Red 13, your little sister Yuffie, and Kate Sith, the Closet Furry. Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barret are all largely unchanged from their Remake counterparts. Cloud is again the character you will spend the most time playing in Rebirth, and he is still a jack of all trades that can be slotted into the role of spellcaster, tank, or DPS with very little effort. The biggest issue with Cloud in Remake, as I mentioned earlier, was his lack of ranged options and aerial utility, and that was fixed via his new aerial dash and new ranged attacks that can be utilized from his dodge. Punisher mode returns, though it has undergone a little bit of a rework to be more mobile and focused on single target damage. Timing the transitions between Operator mode and Punisher mode can also allow you to jump into the air from Punisher mode and return to the same way. Cloud's stance as a jack of all trades is also very fitting for his character, as he's not fully his own yet and is completely held together by the different pieces his shattered mind has glued together of what a first-class soldier should be. Tifa, Aerith, and Barret slot into the same roles as last game. Tifa is your speed, stagger, and DPS queen, who can also build up her lethality through different chi stances, and her new aerial mobility that allows her to be a weapon at any stage. She's also my favorite to play, as her chi stances are super satisfying to build up, and the addition of a stagger-specific stance that flows into her damage stance makes her one of the highest damaging characters in the game, and she also has my favorite limit break.
And there comes a giant fish!
Aerith is your spellcaster, but she has undergone some slight changes with her Tempest, Ward Shift, and Fleeting Familiar abilities from Remake becoming part of her standard toolkit. Aerith is now much safer to use and more powerful as she is coming into her own as a Cetra. However, she is still just as vulnerable as before. Oh, Cloud, you did it! You saved me! Well, I am your bodyguard. Round 2, bitch! And still requires you to build the house around her to actually make her useful. Barret is your tank, and the only one I actually believe has been completely unchanged from his base kit in Remake. A few of his abilities from Remake were reworked to be synergy skills in Rebirth, and they allow Barret to keep his melee aspects that he had in Remake. He's just as tanky as before, and honestly, I think that is for the best. Now for our newcomers. I'm really excited for this one because they were so much fun to play. There's 3 new party members introduced to us in Rebirth, and all of them come in at just the right time to spruce up the combat and party dynamics, at a time just before the combat starts to grow repetitive, and when you've likely gotten a taste of the old characters enough to get comfortable with them. Red is our... Can you fucking not? Red is our first See, this is what you do to me. This is what you do to me. Red is our first newcomer we have access to from the very start of the game. In Remake, Red was introduced to us within the last fourth of the game, so he wasn't made playable due to time constraints, and interestingly enough, he plays very similarly to Remake Cloud. Red is a very agile but very grounded character that is not useful for dealing with most aerial combatants, however that is mitigated by his Vengeance gauge. Taking damage while blocking with Red will fill up a meter that enhances all of Red's abilities. His attack gains more damage and range, his dodges go further, and he now has access to a defensive counter, also similarly to Cloud in his Punisher mode. A couple of Red's moves actually excel when he's at lower health, so there then becomes this thrilling risk versus reward system with Red, as you can pull off some pretty damaging moves with him at low health, but the odds that you'll die using them kind of go up. Likewise, he also has access to some support abilities via the Vengeance gauge, as depending on the ability, he can deplete portions or all of it to heal or apply buffs to the party. Red fits into this bunch of misfits as another jack-of-all-trades character who can excel in any role you put him in. Joining our party after a nice trip to the beach is, you know what, I'm actually just gonna let her introduce herself.
Some know me as the world's greatest materia hunter. Others, an unstoppable assassin. And the rest, a benevolent and beautiful ninja. But who am I truly? Who ties what rose? The one and only Yuffie!
Cool. This is actually the second time Yuffie is playable in the Remake series, as she had a whole DLC dedicated to her. A DLC that I have yet to actually play myself, because I didn't have a PS5 at the time it came out, and I'm surprised that anybody else had a PS5 at that time, so I can't actually speak to how she's changed or hasn't changed. Yuffie is a ninja in every sense of the word. She's fast, precise, and very deadly in bursts and for single target damage when your enemy is weakest. Her raw damage output rivals Tifa's, however, where she falls completely behind is in building stagger. Like, I'm not joking, I'm pretty sure a Moogle deals more stagger damage than Yuffie. Where Yuffie really shines is her ability to build up some of the most damaging combos in the game, and her ability to exploit any elemental weakness. Throw her shuriken and you will be able to attack enemies with magic or whatever elemental damage you have equipped. Retrieve the shuriken or hold it and you can deal physical damage. Within this framework, Yuffie has a lot of nuance and depth to be found in her combat, as she has the most unique animations and attacks depending on if you have thrown the shuriken, your positioning, and the timing of your inputs. Even some of her ATB abilities have different properties depending on if the shuriken has been thrown or not. All of this combines to put Yuffie into a glass cannon type of role that no one else really fills. Our final newcomer to the party is the author's barely concealed fetish, the glorious Scottish furry themselves, Kate Sith. Kate Sith stands out among the party as the biggest wildcard of the book. Kate is a fortune teller, and that translates to many of their ATB abilities having RNG properties that determine if you will hit like Mike Tyson in his prime hopped up on steroids, or if you will hit like Mike Tyson now. This might honestly be some of the most well-balanced RNG mechanics I've messed around with, as I never felt like the scales were tipped too much in favor of myself or the game. The most unique part of Kate Sith is the way their Moogle works. Kate is the only character that has access to their own personal tank, and can remain completely mobile while casting spells. The Moogle has its own health bar while active, and Kate can ride it and attack, or move around separately and attack on its own. Over half of Kate's ATB moves can only be done with the Moogle alive. However, there's a bit of a risk that comes with that, as the Moogle will tank your damage, so if it dies in the middle of an attack, you can't perform that special ability, and you have to use ATB to get another Moogle. Everything in Kate's toolkit comes together to make a character that plays just as wacky and random as they portray themselves in the story, and it's really fun. Now, Kate may be our last party member, but he is by no means our last playable character. That's right, if you thought we were done with all the characters here, Square went ahead and added another twist to the dream and made not just Sephiroth playable, but Best Boy Zack Fair playable as well. Sephiroth and Zack come with probably the most unique mechanics in the game, and are appropriately the two most broken characters in the game. They are the only two characters that you can't change the materia and accessories for, but it really doesn't matter since they will basically have every useful magic attack and debuff or buff spells. Sephiroth is so powerful that you really do not need to understand his mechanics at all to be successful with him. That, of course, didn't stop Square from absolutely cooking with his moveset. Sephiroth's base moveset is basically no different from the rest of the cast. What makes him truly unique is that every basic thing he does is tweaked. Sephiroth's dodge is a literal teleport. If you dash towards an enemy, you will take immediately to the sky and begin combat there. His block is not the same as the rest. He will automatically block damage, but if you time your attacks, you can actually parry. Parrying builds up Sephiroth's aura, and once that is done, he has access to two different counters, a weak and a strong version. Aura can also be built up with just regular attacks, and holy shit does it build up fast. And that is honestly a good thing, because to keep it balanced and intuitive, Square decided to make it so that if you take damage as Sephiroth, you lose the aura charge completely and have to rebuild it again. So once it's built up, Sephiroth has access to 3 special grounded attacks and 1 special aerial attack that he can use at specific intervals in his combos. This sounds very simple on the surface, and Sephiroth can be a little janky to control at first and get used to, but even with the jank, he's still extremely powerful and easy to use and easy to master and incredibly fun to play somehow. Zack is tied with Tifa as my favorite to play in the entire game. Zack has a basic string combo with his unique property in his ability to get into the air via holding the attack button and his ability to come crashing back down to the ground the same way. Zack shares a lot in common with Cloud and Sephiroth. Zack moves a lot like Cloud, only faster, and his dodge is one of the best in the game. Zack shares the meter mechanic with Sephiroth, however Zack's charge has a different philosophy to it. Instead of just 1 level, Zack has 3 different levels that will slowly deplete over time. This charge can be built by either standing in place and charging, or by performing a quick charge. After every single attack, there's a window to quick charge. Upon every successful quick charge, Zack will perform a special attack that will generate an extra bit of charge and ATB. Every level of charge adds power to Zack's ATB abilities, and the 3rd level gives him access to the High Braver ability, a 3-stage super attack that is dependent on timed button presses to complete the move, something he also shares with Tifa, but who's counting, and it will reset the charge for Zack. This creates a really unique flow for Zack's gameplay as you're constantly building towards level 3, and if you play your cards right, you can time it so that you can dish out crazy damage with all of his abilities. The really impressive part of this cast of characters is that within the main party, not a single one is underpowered or overwhelmingly overpowered. All 7 of our playable characters have a place of power in the game that is dictated mainly by your own preference in playstyle and by the final aspect of this amazing combat system, the weapons, armor, materia, and accessories you choose to outfit your party with, and the items and crafting system that allows you to take them even further. Rebirth carries over the majority of weapons, armor, materia, accessories, and items from Remake. However, for everything except items, it dropped a few things. Some examples of this being the materia from Remake, like the parry and deadly dodge, and removing them in favor of making them part of everyone's base moveset, and then replacing them with completely new additions that are seriously awesome and really shake up how insanely powerful you can be. I won't go into depth with all of them right now, as some rewards tie into the game world content, so I will instead highlight the ones I ended up using through my playthrough and team build at the end of this section. Weapons return and function about the same as they did in Remake. Each weapon has an experience bar that affects its damage and has unique core abilities and stats that benefit specific playstyles and builds. Most of them can have their number and material slots increased with time and has a unique ATB skill tied to it that can only be used while that weapon is equipped until the skill is mastered. The main difference is that the weapon cores have been done away with in favor of the folio system as mentioned earlier. I know some have taken issue with the simplification of this system, but to be honest, I appreciate that it was simplified given the amount of expansion done in this game. And even though this is a reduction, it's not a reduction I believe to be a detriment to Rebirth. While I still mainly played through Rebirth, prioritizing the aesthetics over straight statistical advantages, this is largely why I played the entire game with the Buster Sword, because let's be real, it's still the coolest sword in the game, and there's a moment later in the main narrative that is literally the coolest thing you've ever seen and becomes doubly cool if you have the Buster Sword equipped. The game still rewards your engagement with the now simplified core system, as these abilities really can still make a difference with the proper build. The weapon system hasn't lost its relevance nor its level of reward for those willing to experiment with it. Armor, on the other hand, is pretty much untouched from both Remake and the original Final Fantasy VII. Every bracer in the game has its stats and materia slots, and now it can all be upgraded through the crafting system, but I'll get to that in a second. Materia in the original Final Fantasy was a lot more varied, and it made sense to be that way as it was still a turn-based combat system at its core. In the Remake series, materia is still the same system at its core, just slightly altered to work with the real-time action. You still have the same 5 basic types of color-coded materia that get stronger and gain levels through use. Rebirth added some new materia to the game, like the 2-in-1 elemental materia that gives you access to 2 specific elemental attacks at once, like the fire and ice materia, the wind and lightning materia, and the poison and petrify materia. And these really change up the game going into spellcaster builds. They added a perfect parry materia that is really strong and can work on every single character to great effect. They added the Dark Side materia, which enhances the damage of all your ATB abilities when activated, with the caveat of siphoning some of your health every time you use them, which actually makes this materia really useful on Red 13. Then there's my personal favorite materia, the Limit Siphon. When I first got the Limit Siphon, I thought it would just take a sliver of the limit break from another character, but no, it takes all the limit from whatever character you choose and gives it back to you. It's awesome. Alongside these are accessories. These are equipable items that all add passive bonuses to your party members, with effects varying from simple attack power, health and magic point increases, to faster ATB generation or starting the battle with more ATB, and finally to things as powerful as strengthening your summons in battle, filling your limit gauge when meeting certain requirements like on stagger or through ATB and MP consumption, and beginning the battle with a maxed out limit break or starting every battle with a level 2 or level 3 limits. Or, and I know this is a lot already, the big daddy of them all, removing the 9,999 damage cap, which, let me tell you, if you thought the ladies dealt damage before this accessory, you ain't seen nothing yet. With the Genji gloves, Sephiroth looks like a coughing baby compared to Aerith the atomic bomb. Crafting is the biggest new addition to Rebirth, and it's honestly one of the few crafting systems I've played where I've really felt an incentive to engage with it, especially since Rebirth is open world. It's not like Remake where they could finally curate when and where the player was guaranteed to come across potions and items. Early game crafting is pretty useful as you don't have much MP and you want to conserve that at all costs for combat. This incentivizes you to explore the world and to find all the ingredients you can. Usually I'm not one to engage with crafting systems in games. I'm the type of gamer that sticks to what he thinks looks cool, and that's where I have the most fun, and I love having fun. If something looks cool enough and I have enough fun with it, I will ride with it until the boss dies from it. With Rebirth, however, I found myself actually experimenting with all the aspects of the game, and the crafting system had this really satisfying gameplay loop. The more you craft items you haven't used yet, it upgrades your crafting level, allowing you to make higher level potions and more powerful bracers and accessories you couldn't just buy from a vendor or find in the world. And you can enhance those bracers and accessories to be even stronger than they already are. To highlight my favorite pieces of this system, I'm going to run you through my go-to build for my go-to party. I chose to go for the polyamory party. Cloud, his wife, and his wife's girlfriend, also known as Cloud's girlfriend. I think I just made a lot of shippers mad with this one, but who cares? The first combo I had was the Limit Siphon Materia and Enhanced Expeditionary Medal on Tifa, and the Goddard... fucking Vikings. The the Galahorn on Cloud. The Enhanced Expeditionary Medal allows you to start the battle with access to your level 3 limit break, and the Galahorn grants a full limit break charge at the start of combat. Add the Limit Siphon Materia, and I think you can tell how this went down.
What the fuck?
Yeah, there's a very good reason why I love playing as Tifa in this game. Then, I turned Aerith into a 500 kilogram bomb by putting Synergy, Magic Up, Magic Efficiency, Swift Cast, HP and MP Absorption materia on her to stack up my Elemental and Healing materia so she would literally never run out of health or MP, and then throw on the Genji gloves to nuke that health bar. Finally, Cloud served as my tank and support with all the attack power and defense buffs and ATB generation materia, along with the enemy skill materia to enhance his own attack and magic and to turn him into a literal Raichu flying around the battlefield. This combo was so much fun, and it really is a testament to what this combat system allows you to do with all the toys at your disposal. There's even crazier combos that I haven't figured out that other players have. Every part of the Rebirth combat system was simplified or expanded on to be a perfect feedback loop. Weapons and armor flow together seamlessly with the materia and accessories in determining what build you can begin crafting. This then feeds into the folio and synergy system as you allocate your skill points to specific bonuses that can synergize with your weapon core abilities and raise the potency of your skills and materia to create even more powerful combinations that can either be tactically deployed in combat or used on the fly in real-time action. Of course, this is just the first pillar that holds up the dream of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The next pillar is the game world. The combat system may have been where the dream began, but the world of Gaia is where it took flight. Before I actually talk about the world of Gaia, I want to talk about something that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but it's something that stuck out with me in the middle of writing this script. See, as I've been writing this, I've been playing Remake. The main setting of Remake is the steel pizza metropolis of Midgar, and Midgar, for as massive and varied as it is, with its cramped and crappy slums and pristine topside plates, is very claustrophobic. And a lot of this claustrophobia comes from how close the camera is to our player characters. It makes you feel almost trapped inside this city, like you have Shinra all around you taking up every available space. It makes you feel small underneath Shinra's colossal thumb. If I'm being completely honest, I would not have noticed this if I hadn't started playing Remake again for that sweet, sweet platinum trophy, and I'm really glad I did. Camera placement in video games is a feature that often goes unnoticed until you're in the middle of a boss fight and the operator decides to start sniffing glue. It's a very vital part of the experience and the game feel, and to whatever point is being made about the game. Even something as simple as pulling the camera back can give a different perspective to the player. While Rebirth doesn't often pull its camera back in the same way that games like Jedi Survivor or the God of War series will do, its use of camera placement is nothing to scoff at. When Rebirth begins, you're in the City of Calm. It's a far cry from Midgar, and while Shinra does have a presence, it's a pretty minute one. The houses and buildings are more homely, there's plenty of greenery, it looks like a very classic old fantasy village with some steampunk elements. It's kind of a glimpse into what the world without Shinra around every corner looks like. And to give us that look, Square had pulled the camera back. Not only is this a big bonus for gameplay, as the wider camera angle makes it easier to see multiple enemies and the bigger enemies when in combat, but it also allows you to see this game's world in all its majesty. You may not notice it at first, given that you are completely walled in at Calm at the start, but once you open that door and step out into the grasslands,
just look at it all. It's so green.
the world of Gaia is massive and one of the most seamless and rich open worlds I've ever played. And I say this as someone who is fresh off of Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. A game world is made up of many things, and one of the most important pillars that makes up a game world is what is available for the player to interact with that informs them on the history of the world they inhabit. Everything in the game, even from something as small as a description of a swimsuit to something as massive as the history of the civilizations that came before, builds the game world. everything in Gaia has a purpose to show you more about the world we are traveling across and the world we're fighting to save. At every piece of content to engage with, you are learning something about either the enemies you will be facing or the towns and characters you get to interact with. What do these people consider to be threats? What do these people do for fun? Who are the gods of these regions? Why does a seemingly innocent card minigame have a really mysterious, bloody, and spooky origin? All of these questions reward the player for choosing to seek answers with an even greater understanding of the unique world they get to play in, along with some pretty sweet loot that makes your characters even more broken. There's 6 fully explorable regions in Rebirth, each with its own unique visual style, chocobo, and culture. The Grasslands, Junon, Corel, Nibel, Cosmo Canyon, Gungaga, and the Meridian Ocean. Now, the Grasslands is a vast open plain with the most tame and natural monsters around to fight, some of them even being literal flowers and gophers. 1/3 of the Grasslands on the way to Midgar from Calm is more of a wasteland than an actual grassland, and even as you go further away from Midgar and deeper into the rural land, Mako pipes and other tech poke out of the ground. The land reflects Shinra's reach and the effects Midgar has had on the land around it. We can see how lush the land used to be, and how the use of Mako has dried up and killed everything around it, and how technology is slowly making its way into this fantasy land. The only place that remains mostly untouched is in the south, where there's marshes and a giant snake to separate the grasslands from Junon. To cross these vast plains and murky swamps is the standard yellow chocobo, who is quite adept at running and looking suspiciously like the main character. Moving further to the west, there's the Junon region. Junon is very rocky and mountainous, and what separates it from the other regions that share these traits is its remnants of an old civilization and the new city that Shinra erected on top in an attempt to bury it. The Sister Ray is the highlight of this area and only serves to make me even more terrified of the sea than I already was, because sweet Shiva, what the hell exists in this world that requires a gun that big to fight? Along the coast is a bunch of shipwrecks and old structures like a castle ruins and an old watchtower. To get to a lot of these areas, there's the Junon Chocobos, with their grippers that allow them to climb up cliff sides at a pace that totally doesn't make me want to rip my own hair out. Junon has a whole lot of history out there in its ruins. The whole region stands as a testament to what happens when you don't bow to Shinra and try to fight back. Right across the pond, you have the Corel region, which is a unique region in its own right, being both the most inhospitable region, but also the region with the best vacation destinations. Corel is sectioned off into 3 parts. Costa del Sol, the only spa and resort I've ever been to where black robes are considered appropriate swimwear. The Gold Saucer, which is what you get when Disneyland and the Thunderdome have a baby. And then finally, the Wasteland, a dust bowl that no chocobos can cross and we must venture out into with a dune buggy. It's like I'm playing Jack 3 again. It's also Barrett's hometown, and I'm not gonna lie, homie, this place is kinda ass. Gungaga is the next region and marks the first optional area from the original game that is now mandatory for the story. Originally, Gungaga was just an optional side area with a few NPCs to talk to and one broken down Mako reactor to explore. Now, Gungaga is a fully explorable jungle and a fully fleshed out village. It also has the best NPC in the game for reasons, and also the best music. No, I don't mean the exploration music. I mean the music that I've had playing through this entire section. I love me some folksy music. Gungaga is an interesting area because it is by far the most untouched by Shinra we've ever been, and has the most secrets hidden in the jungle, like the ruins of an old civilization. In every other land, there's always been a presence of Shinra right on the surface, staring you in the face, but in Gungaga, barring the destroyed Mako reactor, Shinra's presence is almost completely hidden by the wild, untamed jungle, as if the planet has reclaimed this area for itself. This is also showcased in the traversal with the chocobos. Gungaga's mushrooms aren't just for making a great soup, they're also used to leap tall bushes in a single bound, or you can do your best Tarzan impression. It makes traversal through the area pretty unique and fun. Right after spending so much time in the most full-of-life region, we are sent to the most dead and haunted region in the entire game. Nibelheim is the hometown of Cloud and Tifa, and it was burned down 5 years prior to the start of the journey. And it is also the home of the first Mako reactor from Shinra. This is where you can see the full effects of Shinra's existence on the planet. The terrain is dead, the monsters are mutated and aggressive to an almost extreme degree by the reactor, and the town itself is a ghost town. Nibelheim has been turned into a Mako recovery center, but the damage done to the region isn't something that can just be forgotten. It's all very sad, and because of that, can I offer you the best chocobo in the game in this trying time? Yeah, I don't know what is in this Mako-infused water that mutated the chocobos, but these ones can shoot water out of their feet and then glide to cover some insane distances. It helps to make Nibel stand out from Junon and Corel, as its islands and mountains have something extra to them with these hidden alcoves and tops that you can only be accessed through these helicopter chocobos. The final land region in the game is Cosmo Canyon, and while it's also a desert wasteland like so many of the locations in the game, it somehow feels more alive than any other region. Now, it has its fair share of horrors beyond our wildest imaginations, given that it's literally a mix of Australia and Arrakis. But overall, it's the most open and naturally beautiful land. Shinra has no presence in Cosmo Canyon, they use no Mako power, and there's this intense connection to the lifestream here. The town of Cosmo Canyon is also really cool as it's at the top of the canyon, and you can see the entire map from the top. You can even see into Nibelheim and over into Corel. Cosmo Canyon takes a leaf out of its neighbor's book and has a flying chocobo. However, where the Nibel chocobo is a blessing from the ancients, the Cosmo Canyon chocobo is good for nothing except dinner. I cannot stress how much I dislike this stupid bird and its controls. At specific points, you can jump into the air and glide until you reach the ground, or a new updraft to continue your flight. You can also dive for a certain amount of time and then gain altitude, and good God, I hate it. The Meridian Ocean is the last region of the game, and this is where you actually gain the ability to travel completely from one side of the map to the other without any fast travel or loading screens, which for a world of this size and graphical fidelity is incredibly impressive. The Meridian Ocean admittedly is the most sparse of the regions, but it somehow still doesn't feel hollow, as it does have its fair share of secrets like a whole pirate buried treasure side quest, as well as holding the entrance to probably the wackiest and best character in the game. The regions are also littered with visual guides to keep the player out of the maps as well. You want to find a chocobo station to rest up and fast travel to, and maybe give a little baby chocobo a few pets for being a good boy? Follow him to the nearest bus stop. You want to climb up a mountain in Junon? Find a smooth cliff. You want to zip across Gongaga? Find the giant purple mushrooms. You want to stop and take a cool ass pic with your cool friends before unspeakable horror and trauma befalls them all? Find the stop sign with the camera and take a seat at the sunset. The regions all have plenty of secrets and twists and turns to uncover that encourages exploration. Contrary to what many an angry gamer will tell you, there isn't actually that much yellow paint in the open world, so your exploration still isn't hampered by the feeling of being too funneled toward content. Hell, I even spent about 30 minutes one time looking around the grasslands for the last of the divine intel because there was no yellow paint and it was well hidden. There's no part of these areas that feels empty or hollow. There's always something new to find, be it a lore expansion that tells you more about the history of each town and region, or the planet itself, or some new materia, accessory, or a crafting material that can help you out in gameplay. Every region has the same type of content to engage with, but each one has a little twist to it to fit the region they inhabit, and this content is called World Intel. World Intel is something that on the surface looks like your bog standard Ubisoft open world checklist of meaningless tasks to complete and gain rewards from while you try to get all those stupid little markers off the map so you can actually navigate the world without any visual clutter. But when you actually bite into it, the World Intel takes on a form of its own. There's 8 types of World Intel given to us by everyone's favorite character, Chadley. I seriously do not understand why people hate him. He's just a cute little guy that's interested in weird things. I don't understand it, but whatever, here we go. And you will find these different World Intel across all of the regions. Activation Intel consists of the region towers. Finding and activating a region tower will show you the locations of other World Intel activities on the map in a specific radius, as well as giving you a little bit of history on the surrounding area and its inhabitants. However, you don't actually need to activate these towers to be able to find the other World Intel activities. It just allows you to set a waypoint to them if you want. Now, Rebirth opts to include and rely on a lot more of Ghost of Tsushima style open world design elements through points of interest and other visual signifiers. For example, to find the expedition intel, you can choose to set a waypoint on the map and the in-game compass will guide you to it, or instead, whenever you get near a Mako life spring in the area, a bird will fly down into view and guide you to the nearby spring. The life springs are little hideaways of crystallized Mako full of resources for crafting, different consumable items, and at the same time, scanning the life spring will give you access to learning about the history and ecology of the area. You learn about the planet from the planet. Fiend Intel is entirely combat focused. Find a cluster of fiends in the different regions and fight them to learn about them. At the same time, there are 3 different challenges to complete in each fight that you could figure out how to complete through trial and error, or you could take advantage of the assess materia to plan your strategy for the fight. Completing these challenges nets you some extra rewards with it. After completing the Fiend Intel, you'll unlock the Classified Intel on a special mini-boss fiend indigenous to the region that gives you some special crafting materials for some of the best accessories in the game. Next you have the Divine Intel, which is tied to creating summoning materia. Summoning materia can be acquired from Chadley as soon as you enter a new region. All you have to do is beat them in a fight in the combat simulator and... Okay, look, I love myself a good old masochistic boss fight from time to time, but I also like being rewarded for my exploration. As with the other intel, you could simply just put a waypoint over the Divine Intel and make your way to it from there, or you could be fun and you could use these glowing cube rock formations. Destroy them and it will release a energy trail for you to follow to the site of the Divine Intel. Once there, there's this fun little memorization minigame and boom, you have analyzed the god. Upon analyzing them, you unlock a weaker version of the summon to fight in the combat simulator. And as they get weaker to fight, you receive a stronger version of the summon. Completing all the Divine Intel levels up your summons, boosting their stats and giving them access to different moves, and it's a really nice system that rewards you taking the time to analyze everything, and it's really useful because a lot of those leveled up abilities can be really good. Phoenix's Rearise skill is single-handedly what makes them one of the best summons in the game. Personally, I really do not recommend fighting the summons at full might or even power decreased by 1. I still have nightmares. Oh, hold up. What does that do? I may have made a mistake here. Moogle Intel is an updated version of the Moghouse minigame from the original, and it's super charming. This is another intel piece that you can really just find by wandering around the regions, as they stick out like a sore thumb. It opens to a minigame where you have to corral all the Moogles back into their house under the allotted time while avoiding whatever little tricksy traps they throw out for you. The faster you corral them all and the less you fall for their traps, the more Moogle medals you receive from them for completion. And the more Mog houses you complete, the higher the merchant rank for the Moogle Emporium becomes, allowing you to purchase some new materia, folio books, and rare items and materials. Chocobo Intel is probably the most straightforward and is more often than not associated with a side quest to complete. However, I'll cover it here because, why not? Chocobo Intel, as I said, is pretty straightforward. Find the Chocobo, play a short little game of spot the main character, and then sneak your way through a furry minefield of Cloud's cousins and then mount the Chocobo. Once that's done, you have gained a companion to traverse all across the regions with. And you'll need those Chocobos because you can't complete the Excavation Intel without them. Excavation Intel is pretty simple. All Chocobos have the ability to sniff out some buried treasure, and the game trains you for this pretty quickly upon getting your first Chocobo. However, where the Excavation Intel sites differ from just finding buried treasure on the road is in the transmuter chips you can find. Each of these transmuter chips allow you to craft extra items, armor pieces, and some even hold side quest essential rewards, which you can find before you even start the side quests, making that particular piece of content easier. Now, Phenomenon Intel is the big daddy of the whole system, and it is the most unique of the bunch. In every region, there is a special piece of gear called the Proto-Relic, and it is a story and questline all of its own. In every region, there's this magical piece of gear that has been separated, and Chadley wants us to gather data for it for further research as its potential is limitless. These can be completed in any order, and upon the first completion, you're greeted with a cutscene of the greatest character in the game, Gilgamesh. He is such a glorious weirdo, and I love him. As it turns out, Gilgamesh has been in search of his Genji armor pieces to recover the memories he has lost, and we have been collecting all of those throughout the game with the Proto Relic, which is a nice thematic tie-in to Cloud. The challenges for the Proto Relic vary for every region, ranging from a whole questline with a couple of crooks in Midgar in the grasslands. In Junon, you literally jump into the Fort Condor board game and have a surprisingly deep heart-to-heart with the pieces about life and what it means to be alive. In Corel, you complete a minigame with Aerith and Yuffie for Parappa the Rappa and the Sandman with Cactars that made me want to tear my hair out. In Gungaga, you spend time doing Turk combat challenges and learn about their history and how they operate, and also get to meet up with Best Girl. Please marry me. What? Cosmo Canyon has us fighting the Lifestream in a minigame with robots. I don't really understand this one as much, but it leads to some reminiscing with the old Avalanche crew with Barrett and Tifa, and I didn't know it could rain in Cosmo Canyon. You also finally get to find out what happened to Wedge after the events of Remake. Jesus! And finally, in Nibelheim, you follow the Black Robes around for a bit and learn some pretty haunting truths about soldiers and cellular degradation, and that Hojo is doing some pretty creepy experiments on Chadley that I really don't want to think about, but will probably give me the creeps in Part 3. Upon completion of every Proto-Relic questline, you receive an invitation from Gilgamesh to his island in the Meridian Ocean, and this is one of the most challenging boss gauntlets in the game outside of Chadley's combat simulator. Don't worry, we will talk about that soon. In order to unlock Gilgamesh's fight, you have to have unlocked every single summon in the game, and then fight 2 summons at once. This honestly looks a lot scarier than it actually is, because by the time you reach Gilgamesh's island, you should be max level with the party and have more than enough materia, folio skills, and accessories to beat the summons. This then brings the big daddy of the questline. While you do fight a few different versions of Gilgamesh, they are nothing like this boy, and this boy isn't even the hardest version of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh's boss fight is really fun and ultimately rewards you with one of the best summons in the game, the eccentric, universe-hopping swordsman himself. The Proto-Relic is a lot of fun as a storyline, as it really fleshes out some of the wackier elements of Final Fantasy VII, some of the characters we don't get to always see more of, and some of the more vague and abstract concepts of the world, while also introducing some really fun elements to the world itself. It's also just one of the funniest questlines because Gilgamesh's complete over-the-topness and the rest of our party, who have taken pretty much every wacky thing in this game, like the talking dog, talking cat, and giant Moogle in stride, just being completely unfazed by his eccentricities and completely unimpressed by him. Each of these intel types is guaranteed to give you data points and party experience on top of whatever rewards you get in the process of completing them. Data points is a massive upgrade from the Remake system for Chadley. In Remake, Chadley would give you tasks for battle, and these tasks ranged anywhere from just using the assess materia to ID enemies, to unlocking weapon abilities, exploiting specific enemy weaknesses, and maxing out certain materia types. Those could honestly be a bit of a pain in the ass because of how much time some of the tasks could take, and then on top of that, you had to buy the materia from Chadley after doing the legwork to help him develop it, and then, if you wanted to buy multiple of the materia you made for him to equip on the rest of your party, you probably couldn't because Chadley charged more than a Disneyland water bottle and the economy of Midgar was in a worse state than Sector 7. Rebirth lovingly does what any good economy does. Changes the currency system. Chadley now has static prices for the materia that you develop while you complete all of the world intel, and in order to buy them, just use the data points, and it's so nice. Square created a really smart system that constantly feeds back into itself so that every single thing you do has a reward that expands the gameplay options you have available and expands the world of Gaia. You're always learning new things about this world that informs you on it and always gaining something that can help you in-game and make you stronger. And Square didn't stop just at the world intel. There's another element that they added that really fleshes out the world, and whether you love them or hate them, we're gonna cover them: the minigames. So, one of the bigger criticisms I've seen of Rebirth is the amount of minigames it has stuffed into it. If you would allow me a short tangent, I'd like to address this because I have thoughts. Part of the reason why I love this game so much is how full and fleshed out the world is, and how much personality is jam-packed into each and every region. And as I've touched on earlier, Chadley's world intel and the visual design of all these regions and towns is a very, very good way to flesh out the world. However, there's something missing from those two different narrative tools, and that's the answer to, what do these people do for fun? That is where the minigames come in video games, and I have been missing their inclusion in games for years. Minigames aren't just a way to pad out game time and make the player suffer through really jank controls that you'll never find anywhere else in the game and only receive meaningless rewards that will never be useful anywhere in the game. They sometimes are, only because it's really funny as a developer to make the player suffer over trying to beat a 64-bit miniature version of the main villain, but what they really offer you is a way to flesh out your world on a much more personal level because it gets the player directly involved with the society and customs of a given area. For example, in Junon, the kids and town have a big connection to the aquatic animals of the area, with the frog minigame and the dolphin races. Over in Cosmo Canyon, the people there fly chocobos instead of racing them on the ground like the folk in Corel do. Corel has both Costa del Sol and the Gold Saucer, two areas that are designed to be places where you let off steam and have fun. And they are chock full of extra games like the pirate shooter that feeds into this pirate questline that we get for the Meridian Ocean. And there's also the crazy workout nuts that think doing sit-ups is a fun time, but no. All this does is give me carpal tunnel. The Dust Bowl has a whole bunch of twisted and jank imitations of the Gold Saucer's minigames to reflect its place as a very seedy prison town, with all its minigames being very physical and dangerous. Where the Gold Saucer has the Musclehead Coliseum where attendees can go to test their strength and gain glory, the Dust Bowl has a coliseum that serves as a human trafficking ring. The minigames can even show you just how much the rest of the world has no idea that the main villain of the game is the hero they all still look up to. In the Gold Saucer, there's the 3D Brawler minigame, which is actually one of my favorites in the game, and it has Sephiroth, the hero, as the final boss of the minigame. The entire world has no idea that Sephiroth is the one trying to destroy it, and it kinda adds a sense of tragedy to it after playing the game when we got to see Sephiroth before his fall from grace, and he really fit the hero that everyone thought he was. Now, not all the minigames are bangers. I certainly have my gripes with a few that make the amazing dream that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth feel less like a dream and more like a nightmare, but the added layer they give the game world is undeniable. None more so than Queen's Blood. I have an interesting relationship with Queen's Blood. It is one of the most in-depth minigames I've ever played in an open-world game, as not only does it have enough cards and playstyles to rival Gwent, but it's also one of the few minigames I've played where there's a full and complete storyline to it that spans the whole game side by side with the main narrative. And not only does it stand side by side with the main narrative, and in some cases parallels and foreshadows the main story going forward, but it also adds an incredible level of depth to the history of this world and the culture of Gaia. However, before I get into all that, I should give you a little rundown of how the game works. So, every game starts out the same. You have a deck of 15 cards and start the game with 5. At the start of every game, you can mulligan as many cards as you want if you don't like your hand, and then the game begins. Queen's Blood is played on a 3x5 board, and the objective is to have more points in each row on your side than the opponent does. If you have more points, your total score goes up, and the game ends when either you or your opponent runs out of cards to play. At the end of the game, the scores are tallied from each row, and the player with the highest score wins. The cards in your hands are sectioned off into 4 main categories: Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, and replacement cards. Every single card has a power level in the corner that adds to your score, and then either a status effect or spaces out in front of them that add levels to the spaces. In order to play any of the level cards, there has to be a star down on a space, and in order to play a replacement card, there has to be a card of any type played onto a space. Every game starts off with each player having a star in every row, and then the game continues from there. The game then becomes a question of who will have the most points via your deck, and that's where some of the status effects come into play, and you can get some seriously crazy combinations going with them. Enhance raises the power of the cards in certain spaces, Enfeeble lowers the power, Destroy is pretty self-explanatory. Some cards can raise their own power if certain requirements are met, and these requirements can even include destroying or enfeebling your own cards as well as enhancing them. And then finally, you have the bonus cards that give you extra points for winning the row. Winning the match also builds up your Queen's Blood rank. The higher your Queen's Blood rank, the more challenging and weird opponents you will face.
He is floating.
This ranking system is something I really love because it allows you to fully complete the questline at your own pace, and there's no particular order to it. Every rank up is also accompanied with a little bit of history to explain the origins of the game in the world. With the rules out of the way, Queen's Blood is one of the biggest cases I've seen of being a you get as much as you give type of game. You can be like past Zero during the start of his playthrough of Rebirth and have an absolutely miserable time anytime Queen's Blood came up because you didn't pay attention to the rules, understand the status effects, and didn't bother to buy any cards for 90% of the game from any vendors, and you stuck to the pre-made decks. Or you can be like future past Zero and actually go back and buy as many cards as you can from the vendors, actually read the rules of the game and the cards, and then make your own decks to deal with certain opponents and actually have a fun-ish time with the game. And then there's the story that accompanies it, and it's really intriguing to think about. Queen's Blood is the one minigame that can be found all across Gaia. Every single region has people who play it, even the birds and the dogs play the game. Our main party members play it as well, and for some of them, it brings out some previously unheard competitive sides that's pretty fun to see. The most interesting part of the storyline is the in-universe lore that inspired the game's creation from the long-dead creator, Lidrell, who, by the way, we can actually talk to in ghost form and play a match against. I love this game. Lidrell tells us how the game's inception was created based on real events that have now passed into myth and legend. He warns us of the danger of the cards and how the game, specifically the Shadowblood Queen, could possess you and your mind. The story of the Shadowblood Queen, who was once a kind and benevolent figure who suddenly turned evil and violent, sparking a war that ended with the Emerald Witch finally destroying her, mirrors the history of the Cetra we see later in the game at the Temple of Ancients. And to go even further, our main rival across the Queen's Blood storyline, Regina, ends up getting possessed by the spirit of the Shadowblood Queen, much like Lidrell, and much like Cloud is getting possessed by Genova. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but everything about this final boss is really interesting as well. It's not just that we're fighting an evil card, but we're fighting someone who is in the exact same boat as Cloud, only she's completely alone. The placement of this final boss is something that also gets you thinking, as before all of this, it was just the ruins of an old civilization, but after you play Queen's Blood and find out how much of it is actually true, it gets you thinking and expands the region of Gongaga even further. I wasn't kidding when I said the world of Gaia is one of the most rich games worlds I've ever played, and its ability to seamlessly incorporate and loop all the content back into itself so that everything you do has a beneficial reward is nothing short of impressive. It's really hard in an open world game to make sure every piece of content that the player engages with provides a reward that is equal value to the time they spent doing it, but somehow Rebirth manages to make it work. A common pitfall that many open world games fall into is that the objectives in the open world become more like a checklist than feeling like all this content is naturally part of the world. But Rebirth manages to avoid it through a combination of points of interest to guide the player through the environmental design, and this just feeling of wonder you get from traversing the overworld and learning more about it. It makes for a pretty great playground for you to enjoy a dream in. However, no dream is complete without a little bit of nightmare fuel. For as much as I absolutely love this game, I would be lying if I said there weren't things in it that bothered me. This is not to say that these are definitive flaws. All of these are, as with anything, personal preference barring one very specific issue I've found in the game system that trickles down into the rest of it. So, let's hit that particular nail right on the head. The combat challenges and hard mode of Rebirth are actually really damn fun and a really good challenge. The hard mode of Rebirth is an experience that actually isn't as hard as you might think, and this is due in large part to how powerful you can become with the right loadout on your characters. By the time you finish the main story and gain access to the hard mode, you will have more materia than you know what to do with, and more than enough accessories to make your party even more broken. The part of hard mode that really changes the game is that you can't use items anymore, and resting at benches only replenishes your HP, and you can only replenish some of your MP by resting at chocobo stations in the open world, and to do that, you need a cushion. While enemies do become more deadly and gain new attacks and resistances, these restrictions are what really makes your choices and loadout matter. Which characters do you spec out with magic materia? Which characters have ways to heal a party without expending your precious MP because there's a boss gauntlet headed your way? Do you respec your party's folio skills to have different passives or more active skills? You really have to consider every party member's strengths and weaknesses, as you can't just coast by with button mashing in hard mode. Hard mode really puts your skills and mastery over the combat system to the test. Chadley's combat challenges and the Musclehead Coliseum are cut from the same cloth, as both house a series of challenges that truly do test your mastery of the combat system. The brutal and legendary challenges are the real meat and potatoes of this part of the game, and holy shit do they live up to their names. The brutal and legendary challenges will set you up in a battle gauntlet against the hardest enemies in the game under the same rules as hard mode, so it's just you and whoever you choose to bring into these battles. Do you want the boys to be back in town and take on everyone with Cloud, Barrett, and Red, or maybe with Kate Sith, or do you want to see how the ladies get it done and have them lay the smackdown on everyone? It's really up to you, as outside of the character-specific challenges, you're free to play these with whichever characters you want. The only thing that bogs down this really fun piece of content and exposes the one flaw in the system is the complete absence of equipable loadouts. Admittedly, this is more of an issue with the combat challenges than it is with hard mode, but it is still incredibly frustrating to have to get out of combat and then cycle through a myriad of menus to painstakingly switch your materia, accessories, weapons, and skills around, and it only gets worse when you have to do it for the combat challenges, as you can't even change your materia inside the menus for those. You have to exit completely out of the challenges menus, then go through the whole process of changing everything, then go back into the menu for the combat challenges to try again. It is exhausting, especially when you're trying to do the legendary challenges and you have to change materia and equipment so often for the solo character challenges. I kid you not, I've spent about 210 hours in Rebirth, and about 10 of those were from me just jumping back in and out of combat challenges to the menus to change materia and weapons and accessories. I really want to know why they weren't in Rebirth, as loadouts were probably the most requested feature since Remake, and game devs are nothing if not attentive to gamers' wants. So if anyone's found anything that I've missed in my research for this video, please drop it in the comments. However, for as bad as the lack of loadouts in this game is, and for as terrifyingly frustrating the Ruler of the Outer Worlds could be, both pale in comparison to the true monster lurking in the shadows of an amazing game. No, this isn't that bad. This is kind of no, really, this is just pretty nice. I kind of enjoy this.
Tell it to stop!
Okay, Square. Who came up with it? I'm not mad. I just want to know. Because, in all seriousness, this minigame is actually really impressive. Like, it's up there with The Last of Us 2's guitar minigame for how well it manages to emulate a real piano. But, as with all nightmares, they pass with time, and some can even give way to a more lucid dream. So I was partially joking about Rebirth being a lucid dream. It's more of a half-lucid dream. There's three core aspects of Rebirth's narrative design that is held up by two pillars. There's its world design, which I've already covered, so no reason to sound like even more of a broken record. Then there's the main narrative, which takes us on a roller coaster from start to finish. Within both the main narrative and the world design lies the third core aspect of the game, the affinity system. The affinity system is an aspect that we can choose to engage with as much or as little as we want to. We can affect the story to take what would already be a pretty damn fun roller coaster and turn it into something that's a little more personal. Rebirth notably doesn't change much from the original story, much like its predecessor Remake. It's the exact same story we experienced back in 1997, only told to us through a different narrative presentation and segmented up to function more like a trilogy. The original Final Fantasy VII was a singular story that was told across 3 separate discs because the PlayStation 1 literally couldn't handle a game of that size on one disc. When asked why they chose to split Final Fantasy VII into multiple parts, producer and writer Yoshinori Kitase had this to say: "At the beginning of the project, we had 2 directions we could go. The first was to make the project with the highest possible level of graphics, visual quality, and detail, and not remove anything that the fans wanted to see. Instead, it would expand on the original game to make it something even more immersive. The other option was to include the entire scope of the original game in a single release, but in order to make that work as a modern game, we wouldn't be able to go for the highest visual quality, and we would have to cut back on areas and scenes from the original. Essentially, to make a single release viable, the resulting game would have ended up being a digest of the original story, and we didn't think fans would be pleased with that. Ultimately, we decided the best option for the project was to go for the highest level possible with an expanded story. Having more than one game in the project allowed us to focus on keeping everything people loved from the original, but go into greater detail and more story depth than before." I absolutely adore this approach to the remake series. It's the same core story, the same core themes, and the same core cast, just more of it. It's different, but the same. And Rebirth establishes this right off the bat with beginning its story right where Remake left off. Zack is carrying an unconscious Cloud into Midgar for a short prologue where we see what looks like the aftermath of the remake finale. In the storyline, we see that Barret and Tifa are dead, and Shinra is taking Aerith and Red 13 away in some helicopters. Zack tracks them down and manages to rescue Aerith from Shinra thanks to Red 13 crashing their helicopter, and the prologue ends with Zack cradling an unconscious Aerith. Then we cut to the main narrative with the party as Cloud retells the story of how Sephiroth destroyed Nibelheim 5 years ago. And this opening sets a precedent that gets clearer as the game continues that there's going to be 2 main plots going forward: Zack and the livestream, and the party versus the world. So let's get into them. Zack's interludes in the livestream are a particularly interesting part of the game because it's a completely new story. Zack's storyline is by far the most abstract and vague of the entire game, however, it does have a strong theme throughout. As the storyline with Zack unfolds at the end of the various chapters, sometimes even beginning as Cloud falls asleep, we find out that he's in a dream of sorts in the livestream. Whilst in this livestream dream, we follow Zack as he tries to understand what is happening to him as Cloud and Aerith remain unconscious, and there's a giant tear in the sky that seems to have everybody believing it's the end of days. Zack spends some time with Marlene, and oh my sweet Jesus, the game systems were never designed for these levels of cuteness. Marlene, please stop. My heart can only take so much before I go into cardiac arrest. While everyone else in the dream has given in to their inevitable fate, Zack refuses and actively seeks out his purpose and tries to get Biggs, who is also here in the dream and is also questioning why him, to do the same. Biggs takes this a little too literally and decides his purpose is to continue Avalanche's mission against Shinra. This is when things start to get confusing in the best way possible. As Zack learns about Biggs' choice, he's faced with several different options ahead of him, and the game shows us 3 possible choices Zack makes, each of them leading to a climax of powerful emotion. He could go after Biggs and stop him from getting himself killed, he could go to Shinra and find a way to wake Cloud and Aerith up, or he could be stopped by his inability to decide what to do. If you couldn't tell, this is where things start to get really confusing.
What in the hell is going on?
God bless Zack Fair for saying what we're all thinking. Sephiroth throughout the entire game speaks about worlds within worlds and them all merging together in a confluence of emotions to reunite. What we start to see with Zack is a visual representation of what Sephiroth means. As we start to see the various dreams of the livestream where Zack chooses his path, a rainbow wipe effect plays as we get to the moment of highest emotional climax, when Zack makes his choice to go save Cloud and Aerith versus Biggs, when Zack escapes from his death that seems to follow him no matter what he chooses, and then when Sephiroth comes to kill Aerith in the church. It's after Sephiroth banishes Zack to the Shadow Realm that we see the interludes finally cross over with the main narrative, during the confluence of emotions that Sephiroth has been leading us to. As far as importance to the main narrative goes, the interludes with Zack are very clearly important, as on the first playthrough they're unskippable, where they are completely skippable on a replay of the game. They provide important context and expansion on the workings of the livestream and visualization to what Sephiroth means whenever he starts waxing poetic. We've yet to fully see the fruition of this storyline, but its inclusion in the game via the tear in the sky we see in the final cutscene speaks to its importance to the party's story going forward. And of course it gives me more time with Zack and led to what was probably the most hype thing I've experienced in a game in a while. Side note, this cutscene is cool enough as it is, but when you have Cloud using the Buster Sword, it actually makes it 1,000 times cooler. I love it so much. The party storyline is where we get to more familiar territory, as the events of Rebirth complete the events of Disc 1 of the original. For anyone who doesn't know, Disc 1 started with Midgar and ended with Aerith's death in the City of the Ancients. Along with completing the events of Disc 1, Rebirth also makes a lot of optional areas and characters become unavoidable main narrative events. Regions like Gongaga have not only been fully fleshed out in the game world, but the events that transpire there have been slightly altered from the original and massively expanded on. Conversely, some towns that we first visit on Disc 1, like the original Rocket Town, have been removed from Rebirth. Characters like Yuffie and Vincent, who were once completely missable members of the party, are now unmissable. There's multiple storylines at play in the main narrative of Rebirth, and our party members have all been shifted around slightly due to the change in presentation to fit it better. The biggest strength of this narrative is the fact that the overarching goal is the search for Sephiroth. Keeping the main world-saving drive of the narrative so vague allows the detours we take when moving through the world to have more time to breathe and allow us to spend more time with our party and learning more about these characters. Pacing is often one of the most overlooked aspects of stories in general. Pacing is a fickle bitch with no clear-cut way to nail every single time. Good and bad pacing is not easy to describe, but you will know it when you see it. So, naturally, I'm gonna give it a whirl. Bad pacing in a video game is a lot like when you were in high school and all of a sudden the bell rings and you realize that in the hour you've had to work on your homework for the night, you haven't actually accomplished anything. Good pacing, and by extension the chapters of Rebirth, yes, even the Kate Sith chapter, are the opposite of that. 5 minutes in Rebirth feels like you have covered 5 hours worth of story because of how effectively everything is conveyed to you. The game doesn't rely solely on cutscenes to convey its story, and when it does, they're shot, animated, and performed with so much emotion that it leaves you gripped to the edge of your seat. The characters are all brought to life in such vivid detail with dynamics that are so much fun to witness and be a part of that parts that could be considered pointless padding, like having an entire half of a chapter dedicated to a stupid card tournament on a cruise ship, or extremely annoying padding by forcing us to play minigames in order to buy beachwear because no one in the party can say no to our leading ladies, doesn't actually grind the pacing of the story to a screeching car crashing halt. The game keeps a very steady pace throughout, and it can be extremely engaging. I'm really not one to do long, extended game sessions. I love me some single-player games that tell a thrilling and emotional narrative that make you feel all warm and fuzzy, and make you cry, and Meteor strikes you with tonal whiplash that has no right actually working in the narrative's favor, but I really just can't sit still for that long. I never have been able to. So somehow, even though I knew this game's story like the back of my hand, this game kept me coming back to have sessions of 4 hours to almost 12 hours. There's so many new cogs in the machine of the story that are there for you to sink your teeth into. The mystery of what Sephiroth truly wants, the tension rising between Shinra and Wutai, the ticking time bomb that is Cloud's ever-deteriorating mental state, and the question of whether or not Tifa will be able to fulfill her promise to Cloud before his timer runs out and the fallout hurts all involved. All the expansions on personal motivations for our party members, and the inevitable tragedy that is Aerith's fate hanging over every single step we take towards the completion of this narrative. And speaking of Aerith's fate, the finale of the game takes place at what was the midpoint of the original, and there are some pretty major differences between 1997 and 2024. The differences between this moment and the original have been met with a mixed reception. Some have loved it, some are pretty lukewarm to it, and others, well, you'd think this finale took their dog out to the backyard and shot it in front of them with how much they hate it. Personally, this ending scratches an itch that I've had ever since I've played the original, and manages to add a serious sense of dread to the upcoming finale of this remake trilogy. I've touched on the details of this in a previous video, link in the description down below, so I'm just gonna cliff notes this. Aerith is very, very dead, and Cloud is the only one that is refusing to acknowledge this, and that is very different from him accepting her death no questions asked in the original. What this does is create a real sense of dread going into the next game and leaves us off on a bittersweet note, because it's really sweet to see Cloud be happy. For such a brooding guy who has clearly been through more than he lets on, it's just nice to see him happy, but that sweetness is undercut by the fact that this man is about to have his whole world shattered and his friends are going to bear witness to it. All of these aspects of the main narrative are strong in their own right, but Square didn't stop there. They went above and beyond to strengthen the foundations of their core pillar by successfully adding an affinity system. Affinity systems in any game is a big risk, especially in a video game with a cast as big as this one. Whenever an affinity system is introduced into a narrative, it doesn't matter if that narrative is linear, non-linear, or anything in between. This is an inherent risk of having the narrative feel less coherent than if there were no affinity system. Because no matter how good of a job you do as a narrative designer, there is no possible way for you to guarantee that the player's thoughts and feelings will align with the main player character's thoughts and feelings when it comes time to make a choice. And then, whatever results you get from the affinity system may not even have much of an effect on the story, meaning you just wasted all that time for nothing. And these are problems that Square Enix navigated pretty perfectly back in 1997, and did it again in 2024. An affinity system is nothing new to Final Fantasy VII. The original and remake both featured a system that was very subtle. Certain dialogue choices and actions will see you gaining invisible affection points for certain characters, and this would influence various events in the story. In Remake, this system would influence which character you talk to before you set out to rescue Aerith from the Shinra Tower, being either Aerith herself, Tifa, or with Barret. In the original, this system would influence which character you took out on a date in the Gold Saucer, one of the most iconic and charming sequences in the entire game, and then it also influenced a certain night under the High Wind. No, not that High Wind, this High Wind, but God, do I wish. The most important aspects of both of these systems is that the results of the player's engagements with the system never affected the main narrative in a way that ran counter to it. While none of them were really acknowledged in the main narrative in any meaningful way, all of them served as ways to enhance the storytelling, as depending on who you get, you could be in for a fun time of comedic shenaniganery and learning more about the newcomers to your crew, or a scene that is super heartwarming at the time, but then turns into something tragic after the sword drops, or a scene where everyone watches two dorks bang under an airship where they thought they were alone with the stars. Back in the original, the affinity system did have an inherent bias in the first half of the game towards Aerith, and it's not hard to see why this choice was made. It makes the loss of Aerith cut that much deeper because not only did you lose your best healer that you spent half the game investing time into, and whose loss you will feel in every single battle as you scramble to find a team comp that will fill that void, but you also lost a friend that you spent time bonding with. Rebirth differs from its two predecessors in that it shows you specifically how far your relationship has progressed with each member of the party. This is a choice that I really like, as it actively keeps you aware to the fact that something is coming and you will be getting rewarded for investing time in this system, and furthermore, it allows you to visibly see the fruits of your labor. I mean, come on. They gave me a smiley face for leveling up Affinity. I would have invested in this system without the Gold Saucer date. While you can gain affinity with your characters through a variety of sources like choosing which group to fight with and matching Cloud's swimsuit style with the ladies in Costa del Sol, and using synergy abilities and skills for the first time, the biggest sources of affinity are the conversations at the end of specific chapters and the side quests. The conversations are a really simple and interesting beast to tackle because in order to keep cohesion with the narrative, they have to be something Cloud would say to the others, and this again is tricky as there can be some disconnect between what the players would say and what Cloud would say. But Rebirth gets around this by having 3 different choices, each of which giving various level of affinity that serve as conversation starters to be something that's... Jesus, what did I write here? Okay, I think I got it. Rebirth gets around this by having these conversations begin with an innocuous and seemingly disconnected topic where you have a low affinity, mid affinity, and high affinity choice to respond with. Then, after the choice is made, the conversation will flow into the main topic the party member wanted to discuss with you. It makes for a lot of variety in the conversations and a lot of charm because no matter how off topic the conversation may be to the main narrative, you're always revealing something and learning something new about the characters. Of course, that doesn't mean sometimes they can't be really out of pocket and hilarious.
That's enough.
I think Cloud is a bit of a Monty Python fan. The side quests are the second main path to gaining affinity points with your party members, and you can always tell who you will gain affinity with for the quest because every single one of them will feature Cloud and another character leading the show, even if they aren't currently in your party, and along with the affinity points, you will receive folio manuals at the end of each side quest that grant skill points for both normal and hard mode, looping this piece of content back in with the rest of the game. Something I haven't mentioned until now is the fact that Rebirth doesn't story lock you out of any piece of content in the game. Even though the events of some chapters have consequences that affect the whole of the game world, Square Enix accordingly went through and crafted alternate versions of some quests to make them fit in the current world state wherever you may end up being. This allows you to not miss a single opportunity to strengthen your bond with any other character, as well as allow you to get every single skill point in the game, so you're not locked out of anything. There's a total of 36 side quests in Rebirth, and there isn't a single one that is padding or recycled content. You're always doing something new and always covering new ground with the party members involved, and always having a blast with them. These side quests range from just wacky as hell, like turning into frogs and playing with kids, and working with a children's author to help her overcome her writer's block, to the extremely heartwarming, like taking selfies under the stars and corralling kittens back to town, to problem solving, like working across the world with a chocobo farmer to uncover the truth behind what happened to his parents, and busting up a human trafficking ring. And finally, to the downright PTSD-inducing chicken wrangling.
Say goodnight, Pipoli.
Nani?
They could have lived long and happy lives running free.
And flower picking.
Yeah, seriously.
These side quests. In a side sis got us good. These side quests are also just infectious. The more you do, the more you want to keep doing the next ones because you want to keep watching this band of lovable idiots bond and become a part of it. Even when you're fighting for your life in a battlefield of thorns for 30 minutes, it's all worth it because you got to hang out with these characters. And the skill points don't hurt either. The date in the Gold Saucer is the culmination of all your hard work. If someone were to ask me what I thought Final Fantasy VII is all about, the first thing I would say is snowboarding down a mountain after your girlfriend was just turned into a kebab by Jesus. But the second thing is, unironically, the friends and possibly girlfriends we made along the way. I would have said boyfriends, but unfortunately, I'm not allowed to romance Sephiroth. There is actually 2 dates in the game, one that takes place in Chapter 8 on the first visit to the Gold Saucer, and then the big primetime date in Chapter 12 on our return to the Gold Saucer. Chapter 8 is sort of a halfway point for the affinity system that not only rewards your efforts so far with a taste of what's to come, and because it also gets cut short due to it being character backstory time. It teaches the player that we will be getting Part 2 soon, and we should figure out who we want to meet for Part 2. Especially if you didn't have a date in Chapter 8 and had to wander the Gold Saucer alone and friendless because you haven't been hanging out with anyone enough to make them want to hang out with you. Chapter 8 and Chapter 12 are both pretty charming and serve as a great reward, but Chapter 12 goes above and beyond by giving us scenes purely dedicated to the relationships between Cloud and whoever the player has the highest affinity with. All of the dates are chock full of hilarious and endearing character moments in the loveless play. Tifa and Cloud are completely adorable with each other, the bromance vibes are off the charts with Cloud, Red, and Barrett. Yuffie goes off script like 5 times, and Aerith shares a song that really hits you right in the feels. The date then transitions to the part that got cut short last time, a ride on the Skywheel. There's a lot of really heartwarming stuff in these scenes, and even some really important world-building answers that I honestly respect the hell out of Square for putting this important lore behind a completely missable date with a dog. They also went above and beyond and made sure to include a date with Kate, Sith, Sid, and Vincent that is probably the funniest thing in the game. The characters will also have heart-to-hearts with each other about their pasts and their futures, like how Barrett tells Cloud about his late wife and that Cloud shouldn't let time and the chance for love pass by because it could all be snuffed away in an instant. And how Yuffie tells Cloud about her first crush and then baits him into inadvertently revealing his feelings for Tifa. Cloud and Yuffie is also the most adorable date of the bunch. And how Aerith shares with Cloud that she really wants to get to know the real Cloud that she knows is buried within him. And finally, there's a scene that's been about 20 years in the making that I really didn't expect them to give us so soon. Because there's so many different outcomes for the date, there isn't one definitive date that is the canon date. What the dates are all supposed to represent is what the relationships between these characters would look like when taken to their strongest, and that's the biggest reward of it all for you, and why this affinity system works. And that is really what's so amazing about this game. It's a dream come true for so many, and a dream that you had a hand in crafting. Rebirth is put together in such a way that it allows you to live out your favorite version of this incredible story. There's so much content to engage with in this game that it's almost too good to be true, and the best part of it is that none of it is wasted space. Everything, even the nightmare fuel that had me banging my head against the brick wall, feeds back into the gameplay loop so perfectly that when you sit down to play for just a bit, it turns into hours that you'll remember for years to come. The game world is so well visualized that you'll get lost in traveling across Gaia and discovering all her secrets. You'll go into the minigames with the intent of just getting the minimum to win, and then you'll find yourself spending hours just trying to get that high score breaking boxes. You peek your head into Chadley's Simulator or the Musclehead Coliseum to test your might and get a concussion from bashing your head against the challenges in pursuit of the best loot in the game. And then you'll walk into a town just with the intent of passing through and find yourself helping the people out with whatever their mundane problems are just because you get to hang out with the rest of your party. You'll be so engrossed by everything happening that by the time you get to the end of that story and watch the credits roll over a glorious platinum trophy, you're okay with waking up from a dream that you've been living for the past 200 plus hours. I just can't wait for the next one. Oh, good evening everybody, and man, we hit the end of that video. It was a doozy, and I loved every second of it. I've been wanting to talk about Rebirth for so long. I loved so much of this game, basically every single second that I spent my time in, even when I was pulling my hair out trying to get the A rankings on the stupid piano minigame. It was worth it. I was having a good time. I may have spent like 4 hours on Kate Sith's solo challenge because the Mind Flayer at the end, why would they do that? But it's just a test of endurance, and look, I can go the distance. But yeah, I had a great time with this game. I hope everybody else got a chance to try it out, and let me know down in the comments below who you got for your Gold Saucer date, who was your main party, what was your main setup going through, and what did you love so much about this game? I love hearing what everyone has to say. Please, if we do, I know things get heated in this fan base. I've spent like less time than anybody else in this fan base, and I'm already tired of the shipping wars. It's like I thought I knew shipping wars because I was in the Spider-Man fan base. Oh dear God, these people been fighting for like 20 plus years, and it's not been pretty. But anyway, let me know everything down in the comments below. What did you like about the game? What did you not? Who was your main party? Who did you get for the date? Who did you try to romance and then accidentally get the other date? That happened to me, and it was kind of funny. But I'll see you all next time. I have some plans for some new videos. I think I might do a Lies of P video next because, man, I've been wanting to talk about that. and DLC for that game should be coming out. I did get to play Marvel Rivals as well, so that video, I want to do a little video going over the game and what could possibly be done with it, because it's really fun and it has a lot of potential, but I don't want it to get Overwatch 2 again. So, with all that out of the way, good evening everybody, thank you for coming in. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all of the good YouTuber stuff, and I'll see you guys next time.